Alright guys, so today we're going to talk about rates and unit rates. We're kind of extending on what we learned about with proportions and applying it in a different way. So what is a rate? A rate is a ratio that compares two quantities measured in different units. So if you think back to yesterday, we were comparing like items to items. We did apples to cherries, or we did cupcakes to donuts, or dogs to cats. When you're talking about a rate, you're talking about things that have different units. So something like this example here, Billy can do 100 jumping jacks in 5 minutes. So you're talking about jumping jacks and minutes. Those are two different units. So we can actually write this as a rate, just like we were writing ratios. Remember, we learned about those 3 different ways. But we're typically going to write them as a fraction. So 100 jumping jacks in 5 minutes. Okay, and we talked about simplifying yesterday. We don't need to simplify here, right? The rate for Billy would be 100 jumping jacks in 5 minutes. So that's what a rate is. Now when we're talking about unit rate, in this case, this word unit would mean 1. So a unit rate is a ratio, so it's still that ratio, whose denominator is 1. So it's just like what we talked about on the last slide, where you're doing 2 different units, like jumping jacks versus minutes, but the denominator has a value of 1. So this example is, we're still talking about Billy. He can do 20 jumping jacks in 1 minute. So since down here we have a denominator of 1, this would be a unit rate, not just, it's also a rate, but it's a unit rate. All right, so today we're going to talk about how we find the unit rate of something if we are just given the rate. So in a minute we'll circle back around and talk about Billy again, but let's talk about what the process is to actually find unit rate when we're given the rate. So to change a rate into a unit rate, you set up a proportion, which is what we've talked about, which is just equivalent fractions. A proportion is just a pair of equivalent fractions. And you will divide both the numerator and the denominator by the denominator. Okay, so what does that mean? Let's look at the example below and talk about Billy again. So there's actually a typo here. It says Billy can, this should say do, 100 jumping jacks in 5 minutes. And we want to know how many he can do in 1 minute. Okay, so it says to change a rate to a unit rate, you set up a proportion. That was step 1. So we're going to set up a proportion, which is just equivalent fractions. So to set up this proportion, we're going to put the first rate that we were given, which was Billy can do 100 jumping jacks in 5 minutes. So let's set that up like we talked about before. So 100, I'm just going to put jumping jacks, JJ for jumping jacks, in 5 minutes. Okay, that's our first rate. And the question is asking us, how many can he do in 1 minute? Okay, so we're trying to figure out that unit rate. So to set this up, we would say, okay, how many jumping jacks? We don't know. Can he do in 1 minute? Okay, so the next step, once we've set up our proportion, divide both the numerator and the denominator by the denominator. So our original denominator here, 5, if we're thinking, how do I go from 5 to 1? I'm going to divide by 5. So whatever I do on the bottom, I'm going to do on the top. I'm going to divide 100 by 5 to get my new number. Okay, so think back to yesterday when we were solving proportions. That's exactly how we did it. So when we do that, we're basically doing what step 2 says, which is divide the numerator and the denominator by the denominator. We took the numerator and divided it by 5, and the denominator and divided it by 5, and that will give us our answer. So 5 divided by 5 is 1. We already did that. Got 1 down here. And then 100 divided by 5, you can do long division. You could also maybe do this in your head. 5 goes into 10 2 times. Okay, and then 5 goes into 0 0 times. So we get our answer up top would be 20. Okay, so that is a very short example of how we are going to solve these. Okay, so what you're going to do now is you are actually going to close this video and watch the second video that we've posted on here for unit rate and finish that one.